Greetings and welcome to the OSC Technology webinar. Today's topic is Azure and Hybrid architecture. This is a series of webinars OSC Technologies puts on enterprise applications and architecture and cloud projects that we are working on. Today we are happy to have one of the key OSC team members from the field, Julian Zhu, Principal Consultant. Say hello to the team there, Julian.
Hello, everyone. This is Julian.
Great. And myself, I'll be kicking it off. I'm Garrett Grajak, CEO of OSC. And before we commence, I want to give a special thanks to a Microsoft team member that's very, very helpful to OSC and to all people. He's a technical director of Microsoft, and he aids us a lot in content like for this webinar, but also for advice and for guidance on many, many things Microsoft. He was on our last webinar, which was Azure AD, and we'll talk a little about this, but that has been recorded and you can see it at our site or at YouTube. Okay, the agenda today is we're going to do a little architecture overview of, in general, what Azure is, the IAAS, the PaaS, and the SaaS, some differentiators of Azure, and then we're going to have Julian take over, and he's going to break out into network and security, services, and big data. Then I'll do a little overview of OSC, and if there's time, we'll do some Q&A. Now, I put a lot of these slides in because I get requested for the slides after every presentation because I know team members out there what you're doing. You're taking information OSC sees, and then you're helping your teams make decisions on applications and architecture. That's something that I'm glad to help out, and what OSC does basically for a living. What is relevant today is the cloud, of course, is exploding. The market right now, $204 billion in 2016, is an amazing number. Well, what's really amazing is the amount of growth. Over 63% of companies are expanding their cloud over 10%, and 21% over 30% incremental spending this year. What's relevant and why we at OSC, who is agnostic, we work, of course, with Google, we work with AWS, we work with the private clouds. It's just that we're working mostly now with Azure, and there's some key reasons for that. One of them was a great JP Morgan survey, is the most critical vendor out there for all these enterprises is Microsoft, and therefore Azure is just the logical adjunct to that. If you're going to use Microsoft already, why not go to their cloud, which has some amazing features, which will show and itemize why the Microsoft Azure cloud is so key and so crucial to the enterprise, and especially enterprise application deployment. Okay, and that's why Microsoft leads in this high trust survey on investigate first for new projects. Also, by all rankings, the Azure cloud is by far the most capable, and I'll show a slide on this, for hybrid integrations. The main pushes, and this is where we can help you on this, what people we see are doing, sure, dev and test, but that's just usually just throw up a virtual machine in the cloud, and that is pretty much I see everywhere, AWS and GCE over at Google and Rackspace, etc., and Azure. But what we're seeing is these two. We're seeing the lift and shift where you take the application and you put it into the Azure cloud, and then what Julian's going to do an excellent job on is talk about how to extend the data center with the private cloud. Public cloud, and just to define some terms, of course, are what we see as the non-shared space, and I have a nice slide that David Chow, our Microsoft advisor, provided us, so I'll break this out to, but it's your standard SaaS applications. And of course, when we say SaaS, we mean the other ones as well, the Salesforce, Google Apps, etc. But when we talk about Microsoft, these are mainly when we talk public clouds. The private cloud is what we'll spend most of our time today, is where we're seeing most of the consulting and the advisory roles at OSC is jumping in and saying, great, how do I integrate this wonderful infrastructure that Azure is offering into my system? Of course, the public cloud is relevant too, and we'll cover a little of that with Azure AD. This slide is extremely useful for us engineers trying to explain it to management. Okay, so this is where we're coming from. A lot of us still, where we're doing the whole stack. And IAAS, infrastructure as a service, helps a lot by saying, listen, we don't have to manage the hardware or the virtualization. A jump up from that Microsoft also as well is the PaaS, platform as a service, where literally all you provide is the Visual Studio, and you have your programmers connect and program directly into it, and all the services are held in the background, including all the storage. Lastly, of course, is just a layer 7 interface where a browser just talks directly, or a mobile app directly talks to the software as a service, and that's your Office 365, your Salesforce, etc. What's relevant, and what we're going to spend most of our time today, is this. This is where we all used to just see the cloud. Great, I'll put some virtual machines up there. Microsoft spent over $1 billion on this. There's some amazing features. That's why Julian's going to start off with the networking. Some amazing features done like that. What I also want to emphasize is two other things. There is no service around in IaaS that does as much as Azure and Azure AD. Amazing abilities of Active Directory in the cloud, not just the directory, but all the input and output via the ACS component, the access control component as well, all built in. And then, what is relevant to your applications? This is more user base. What's relevant to your applications is how do they communicate behind the scenes? What are the messaging facilities that Azure has set up for you to dialogue between your applications and your, well, application to application and application to data store? So amazing, amazing functionality Azure has that we'll cover today. And lastly, what we'll also cover is how can I do big data? Well, that's a lot of hardware for you to deal with. Azure is in a really nice job there. And as I said last slide before I jump over to Julian, Azure Active Directory is simply a mind-blowing endeavor to start researching. And that's where a lot of our consulting time is being spent, is helping teams understand how do I move to this wonderful identity management system that Microsoft has built for us. How do I take advantage of its amazing scaling abilities, but also how do I take advantage of its ability to not only accept identities and authentication via SS, but also assert the identity. And that's something that Azure AD has all built in already. Okay, enough of the introduction. Talk to you in a little bit. Julian, why don't you take it over and do a deep dive for our audience?
Thank you, Garrett.
We'll make you presenter.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we see your screen.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this is Julian. I'm one of the principal consultants from OSC. Prior to OSC, I've been working as an enterprise architecture for the last 15 years. So get started. So the Azure is a very, very complex cloud infrastructure and the services provider, for sure. So I want to simplify that. Let's start with a very simplified, this is an oversimplified business scenario. From point A to point B, that's the requirements. Right, so how to get there? Usually you look at the different options. I use this as an example to demo the idea behind the hybrid approach. So you could have different ways to go from point A to point B. You can own your own car, you can drive your car, you can rent a car, you can walk even, and different options. And the hybrid approach exactly just like that. Right, you have your own data center, you have your own premises systems, and then you have requirements that push you towards the cloud. And that's typically where the hybrid approach coming from the reality. And the reason I show this slide is I just want to give you a simple picture. Why, this is very similar to the hybrid approach scenario. But at the same time, another message I want to convey from this diagram is show you the thinking from the enterprise architecture side, your roadmap planning. Point A is your current state, right? Point B is your future state, and how to get there. This is leading to my point here is that from the architecture project standpoint of view, based on my experience, I started with the developer many years ago, and advanced my career from the developer to the solution architecture to the enterprise architect. Right, so the same approach you think from the technology strategy standpoint of view, consider the hybrid approach. Everybody talk about cloud. They will say, want to go to the cloud. Why? Right, so you need to ask you a big question. What's your strategy around the cloud? You're not going to the cloud because everybody else is doing the cloud strategy. You need to tie that directly to your business. Fundamentally, that's around the strategy planning. And based on that, what's your reference architecture, what's your infrastructure and the technology roadmap, and also consider the technology standards. What do we have today, and what do you plan to establish as a standard for the future? And given that, you also need to think about from the solution side, how you wanted to apply those roadmap and the standards of reference architecture to solve your business problem. How you're going to create an appropriate expand your IT infrastructure to support the business growth and needs, and then how you have the solution to address the security, SSO, identity management, access control, things like that, and how you address the networking, the requirements to make sure the data can be exchanged and communicated among the systems, and how you want to deal with the services in the data. Right, that's all kind of things you need to consider from the solution standpoint of view. And then it goes down to the application level, and given you have the standards, you have a solution reference architecture for your enterprise, you need to think about what's the implementation framework to support those features and the capabilities. So with that, I'm going to jump to 3 scenarios. So for the Azure, sure, Microsoft put a lot of investment and effort to build a cloud infrastructure. We can probably spend a week to talk about all the capability and the offering from the Microsoft. But for the sake of time, I picked the 3, I would say, very straightforward use cases or the scenarios we can cover today. Hopefully, you can learn something from here, and then it can help you to make your decision how you want to use Azure as a cloud to add to your hybrid approach. So the first one, let's start from the very basic one. Networking and the security. So in order to have the hybrid approach, typically you're going to have an on-premises infrastructure data center, and then you're going to have Azure as a cloud. And the first question is how you're going to exchange your data, right? That's at the networking level. So basically on the diagram, I want to put a very simplified way, show you the options you could have. So the first one, internet. And for the internet access, basically from anywhere, from your on-premises network or from your home, the remote office, you could access like a portal or the public accessible resources. That's that's given. And then you talk about the data center to the data center integration from the on-premises network to the Microsoft Azure. So the second one is the point-to-site VPN. And the point-to-site VPN basically allows you to create a secure connection from your Windows-based computer to your virtual network within the cloud. And that does not require you to have any special software. And this is being provided by the VPN policy maintained from the Azure side, allow you to download a VPN client to your computer and use that as a part of a Windows built-in VPN client to access the Azure virtual network. So this is a consideration for this scenario. This typically, I'm talking about option 2, in case you're not following me here. So this is typically used as a prototyping, dev, or testing lab scenarios for you to access the Azure the virtual network on the cloud. So let me just change this, easier to follow here. And the typical bandwidth for this option is less than 100 megabits per second. And then also the similar configuration can be used to create or configure to work with some of the side-to-side connectivity options, which is at number 3 as illustrated on the diagram. This is side-to-side VPN. So side-to-side VPN allows you to create a secure connection between your on-premises site and your virtual network on the cloud. And this is also based on the industry standard IPsec VPN and allow you to do the site-to-site VPN. And the typical bandwidth for this one is typically less than 100 megabits per second, similar to the point-to-site VPN. And let's speak over the number 4. This is an option. I'm sorry, actually go back here. The number 3 is also, think about the typical scenario is for the dev testing lab scenario, and also is appropriate for the small-scale production workloads for the cloud services and the virtual machines. That's for the number 3. And let's talk about the number 4, which is a very interesting and exciting offering from the Microsoft. It's called the Express Route. This is offered by the Microsoft Azure for the networking connectivity between your on-premises network to the Microsoft Azure. And in order to use the Express Route, basically there's a dependency on your network service provider. And typically there's the 2 scenarios, depending on where your data center is. And if you have the data center, basically have a co-location environment at the Express Route location, what we call the exchange provider facility. If you're not familiar with what it is, you maybe wanted to search for exchange provider facility to see what does that mean. But if you are, basically your data center is in the co-location environment from one of the exchange provider facilities, you can basically use the Express Route to connect from your premises network to the Microsoft Azure. The protocol supports basically the direct connection over the VLANs. And for that reason, basically the typical bandwidth could be much, much higher. It could be 200 megabits per second, 500, 1 gigabit, or the 10 gigabit. That's all possible, depending on with the service provider over there. And then if you don't have, you are not at one of the co-location of those exchange provider facilities, you could still connect from your on-premises to the cloud, and using some existing WAN network, and whatever the network service provider can support the protocol, you could use. That's basically specifically to the service provider you currently work with. And this is all high availability building, for the failover capabilities. Typically have the primary and the secondary connection between those 2 sites, and allow you to do the failover. So those are basically different options allow you to do the networking level connectivity between the premises and the cloud. And networking, that's good. You can exchange data. And the one thing I want to emphasize here, which we covered in the last webinar, is the Active Directory. That's one of the quote main reasons that a lot of enterprise select Microsoft as their cloud, the service provider, because Active Directory is being widely used within the on-premises data center for the identity management, for the access control, for the enterprise. So this thing that I want to highlight here is the capability built in the Microsoft Azure called the AD Connect, which allows you to do the synchronization between the Active Directory from the on-premises and the cloud. The reason why you want to keep those 2 copies, I think most of the enterprise, you may have this hybrid approach for a while. And the smaller companies startup company may just jump to the cloud directly. They probably don't need to maintain a local Active Directory. But most of the enterprise, they do, right? So that's one of the reasons you want to keep those. And the reason you keep the cloud copy of the Active Directory is to allow you to push your strategy. This is back, once again, back to your roadmap discussion, to support a cloud-based identity management and the access control, right? So you have data connectivity, that's one thing, but how you control the user access to the appropriate resource on the cloud and on the third-party systems and your business partners, that's all around the access control and around the identity management and the SSO, things like that, which we covered in the last webinar. So if you're interested in that topic, I encourage you to look at the link that Gary mentioned that we're going to send out along this webinar, and you can take a look. So that's the first one. Let's jump to the second one. This is also one of the many typical web-driven architecture enterprise implements around the messaging-driven services integration. So I picked this one because I think this is very typical and useful for the hybrid approach, especially to integrate the on-premises legacy application with the Microsoft Cloud application or any application on the internet. So basically the idea is that anywhere you can integrate by the messaging-driven architecture. So basically on the right-hand side, this will highlight the Microsoft Azure Services Bus capability. Typical enterprise services integration pattern here. So 1, 2, 3. Actually, there's 4. I'm going to talk about the fourth one later. So the first one is a queue-based messaging. Right, so you basically have a messaging sent over here to put in the queue, and the queue works as a broker, and the message will be kept in the queue until the consumer application retrieves that message. That's a typical messaging integration pattern there. And the second one is very similar to the first one, except this is a typical enterprise services integration pattern around the publishing and subscription. So there's a messaging coming, and then there's a multiple subscription or subscribers to retrieve those information, and they can apply the appropriate filter to retrieve the information they are interested in. And the third one is a different pattern. This is called a relay. The first, the one, and the number 1 and number 2 is the messaging driven, and basically this is for the typically asynchronous integration. So the input the application, put the message in the queue, and basically waiting for the subscriber or the consumer application to pick it up. And the number 3 is basically synchronous integration. And I can explain to you what the scenario we typically use this one for the service integration. So back here, this is a local web services or legacy application you may have within your on-premises data center. And those applications may or may not be exposed through your DMZ. You may or may not have the public IP address. Right? So they could be protected by the firewall, and it could be constrained by the NAT. Yeah, basically NAT stands for Network Address Translation, if you're familiar with the networking technologies. Right, so those systems typically they can go outbound, but not allow the inbound traffic coming from the outside. So to consume those legacy systems as a services, and this is exactly why we have the relay services within the Microsoft Services Bus allow you to do the pass-through, and basically what this is to provide open connection between your legacy as an outbound connection to this service bus on the both ends, right? There's the outbound from here to the services bus, and the consumer side have an outbound connection to this service bus, and this is basically to a relay. And this can provide a real-time synchronous connection to allow the service consumption from your legacy application or systems to either the cloud or to the third-party application, or even to the mobile app and things like that. So this covers hopefully this is pretty straightforward. As I said, I don't want to complicate the whole thing. You know, enterprise architect typically what we're trying to do is to make the best use of those platform capability and come up with a simple, efficient solution. That's what I, like to provide. So this is scenario 3, and we talked about in a previous slide that I mentioned 1, 2, 3, and we have a fourth way of doing the service integration, which is reflected here, the Azure Event Hubs. Azure Event Hubs actually is part of the Azure Services Bus capability, allow you to do the event messaging. And the reason I put in here is that there's an overlap the capability you could do using the Event Hub. Event Hub, put another way, basically they can accept the event messages coming to this component, and then you can do or retrieve those information and do the certain things. So it sounds like it's very similar to 1, 2, 3. But the difference is that also this is designed for the different use cases. Typically, is to support a larger scale messaging or the information, and it's very, very appropriate for the big data architecture. So let's start from the high level. There's a big data reference architecture I put together. So the big data, right? So basically there's a three characteristics go with the big data, right? Is the large volume and the increasing high velocity, how quickly the data will be coming. And also the variety of the data. Is it structured data or unstructured data or different types? Right? Think of those use cases, right? So this is typical where the data type is coming from. The data could be coming from unstructured public or internal sources, and from the customer conversations on the internet, or some other information on the internet, from the social media platforms, or from the sensors, right? Whatever the business you are in. Those information coming to your enterprise, this is a very, very large volume and have a very, very high velocity. And this is the source of the data. And as we talk about in the networking side, this data can come from the internet, can come from your private connections, from your on-premises infrastructure. And those data come to the Azure Event Hub. Well, I just want to emphasize one thing. This is one of the many reference architecture, we can come up with a solution to address the needs. This is not the only one. Okay, so I just want to give you some idea how we can leverage the Microsoft in some way to leverage those services provided by the Azure cloud to implement your hybrid approach. Right, so the information coming to the event hubs, this is appropriate for the large scale ingestion of the messages. And this is the typical, if you're familiar with the big data infrastructure or the technology, this is a Microsoft services offering. It's called the HD Insight and Cluster. That's the offer from the cloud. And the beauty of the cloud approach is that they can hide all the complexity around the server provisioning, infrastructure provisioning, all that. You can manage those quickly. You can provision a cluster very quickly, and with all the technology and the product being provided. So we can quickly talk about this, the architecture here. From the bottom side is Microsoft Azure Storage Blob. It's called a WASB. And this is basically high-performing distributed the file storage system. And the Hadoop is this is now popular. Everybody talk about those big data infrastructure. And this is basically based on, first of all, the Hadoop distributed file system. This is the core of the big data computing, right? The file system. And the good news is that WASB is built based on the Hadoop distributed file system API. So they're all compatible in sense. And the HD Insight cluster basically contains Hadoop technology families, as the things that showed here, and a lot of the supporting utilities components actually is not shown, on this diagram. But it's not on the file system. On the top of the file system, you have, the different data storage, data layer technology product can support a data analysis. So HBase, this is mostly appropriate for the NoSQL type of data store. And then this Hive is more like a data warehouse type of approach. And then there's the analytics layer for the different language support to do the analytics based on this data. Right? MapReduce, this is the framework allows you to do the parallel computing and analysis for the data. And the Young is the next generation of the MapReduce. I think this is probably called like a MapReduce 2.0 or something like that. And this one is for the machine learning on the top of the Hadoop platform. And on the top of that, those are two clusters also is part of the HD Insight offering, Storm and the Spark. And people working in this space are probably very, very familiar with those capabilities. The one is focused on the data parallel computing. Another one is focused on the basically the services parallel computing. Those are for the basically improve the performance of the analytics programming or the computing on the top of the big data platform. And then all those things can provide the appropriate access, through the different programming language like Java, Python, through the different, all the VCGAPT drivers. They can expose to the business intelligence user tools. And then those are some other utilities support the data integration. You could do the block load between the structured, traditionally the relational database and the big data storage, or you can do the connecting and counting the data by using the UC curriculum. And the UZI, I don't know how to pronounce it properly, UZI, and that's the scheduling utility allow you to manage the dependency and the scheduling for the job workflows. Right, so this is a kind of a quick overview, like a big data supported within the Microsoft Azure services called HD Insight Cluster. And another beauty of the cloud is like you use as you pay, so you don't have to create a whole lot of investment into your data center to create a big data infrastructure. And then you find out that you probably don't use that much until like 5 years later. And the expense, the cost for the using the cloud cluster, and those are particular technology is pretty linear. Meaning, you based on what you're using, you can very, very clearly project the cost down the road. So with that, that's pretty much what I want to cover today. I think it's like 3 minutes past the 1:30 Eastern time. Garrett, are you good?
You did great. That was fantastic. Let me wrap that up here. Okay.
Great.
And back to myself. Okay. And I saw some questions. We will be providing these for everyone. Do you see my screen there, Julian?
Yes, I can see the screen, yes.
Perfect. So a little just word about who are we, OSC Technologies. We have over 15 Microsoft certifications. Amazing, learned team. We do high-end projects. 3 PhDs on staff, multiple masters, 10 patents, hundreds of years of cumulative project experience. What everyone out there should know is we have a whole set of onshore programmers and consultants, such as Julian, but also have offshore as well. It's a full service team. We are working on everything from cloud designs to, like we said, lift and shift projects, to big data projects, to security projects, to complete architecture and consulting projects on web, mobile, and cloud. Also, lots of work the team's doing on the REST APIs and basic integrations, the site-to-site and service-to-service applications. Okay, I will be providing these slides, and just will point out some of the URLs that we use. We are available for discussions, and as Julian hinted to, we went a little over than we usually do, so we'll be responding to questions over email, or you can contact us directly at these numbers. Okay, Julian, thanks for a great presentation and great overview, and thank you, wonderful audience, for today's attendance. All the best, and we hope to hear from you at OSC.
Thank you for the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian.